Because it's like you say, the emotional impact, it can interrupt the relationship so much that it causes more conflict, more kind of discourse that then is harder to recover from. So when we look at behavior, and behavior is a massive one that, like you say, it goes along law. So you've got the law process, but then you've got the actual human behavior side. And you humanize the law by actually recognizing that as a thing, right? Which is what's so impressive. Because when people's behavior isn't able to be kind of contained, that affects their process really quite significantly.
It really does. And I often reflect on that with clients who, because of the intensity of their emotions and the way they have, they've almost overdone their emotion, particularly in front of their children. We see it a lot in Parenting Matters, where if fathers, for example, if they have found themselves in a situation where they're not seeing their children as much as they would like to, and they're now finding themselves, negotiating for an extra hour here and there, and really wanting to have this relationship with their children that they had before, but for whatever reason it's being blocked. That overall sadness and that over emotion can really impact the way, if they behave like that in front of the children, if they show the children how sad they are and they cry every time they see them and they really just overdo it, it has this effect on the children that they just feel guilty. They feel like they're responsible for doing something bad to dad, and then that just in turn has an impact on them. And even though dad didn't mean to do that, that's what's happened to the children. And then children come home, tell mum how sad dad is. That just infuriates mum. Mum and dad start with the conflict, and then the kids know that there's a big text message exchange going on that's fighting over an extra hour here or there. Or if dad tells the kids that he's going to just ask mum just for another extra hour because they're having so much fun, but then mum says no because for whatever reason, they might be legitimate or not legitimate, the kids are already embodied in that conflict just because of dad's inability to withhold that emotion, if that makes sense, and understand the emotion and control it. So controlling your behavior is a really big part of managing your process really well, because it's about managing your relationship with your spouse, who in parenting matters like that has a lot of power, right? So in each of them have power with in parenting matters, despite that the children are the ones that should be the most powerful, and it is all about the children, and it's the children's rights that the law is framed around. Unfortunately, it's when parents are in conflict is when the biggest impact happens on kids. So when we're talking parenting, the way the parents behave is so integral to their ongoing relationships with their kids, both during this process and then beyond it. And the more conflict that comes, the less likely that the long-lasting, meaningful relationship is going to continue, because there's all this tension, and then it's just a downward spiral from there. So we've seen it happen time and time again where if people's emotions are not handled well and their behaviour isn't handled well and controlled, they make mistakes that they regret. They say things that they shouldn't. They create conflict where it wasn't there before, that didn't need to be there, and it sets them on this downward spiral to a lesser meaningful relationship with their children.
Yeah. And also the other party then doesn't want to come to the table to negotiate in a respectful way, right? So it really impacts then moving forward through the divorce in a way, or the separation in a way that is more kind of conducive to a quicker settlement and a more balanced one. And it's harder to recover from as well when you have an overkill of emotion. But yet when you speak to clients about that, I would imagine they think that it's important for them to show that they feel this way because they need to express how they are feeling, but it's actually the opposite.
Clients often talk to us about this concept of fairness. That's not fair. I don't want to do that. That's not fair. They're my kids too. All these, these real feelings of fairness, and even as it relates to property settlement and division. Oh, well, equal 50-50. That's fair. And sort of really struggling to understand the law and the intricacies of the law and how sometimes different ways of settling a matter are more in line with the Family Law Act, even though they might not feel so fair to the clients at the time. And so again, conflict in either of those situations can really impact even the other one. So if you're in a situation with children where there's conflict that's brewing because of behavior around your emotion, and then that's caused so much tension in that relationship, then your spouse doesn't want to negotiate on property and doesn't want to give, there's two different powers going on. We often see one of the spouses has more power in parenting, for example, and then the other spouse has more power in property, and they use it against each other when the conflict is high. And it doesn't give the right outcomes, if that makes sense. So if all the emotion is controlled and looked after, so really well managed, it's about understanding it but then managing it, and once it's managed, it then dissipates, and then people can communicate sensibly, they can negotiate respectfully, they can sit around the table and think objectively about how an outcome ought to look and what's right for their family, what's right for their children. And I often say, even though it's one family turning into two, it's one family staying whole, just existing in two different households.
Yeah.
And so if you consider it like that and you think about the importance of your family being too important to risk in a courtroom, and their lives are more important to be controlled by you, and the decisions ought to be made by the two of you together, not by a judge, then it makes sense to just really reframe and refocus your attention on controlling and managing your behavior now, because the way you behave impacts the conflict. And then when conflict is low, settlements happen. It really just is as simple as that, but it is often not as simple as that.